There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that kindness alone is not enough. You can be patient, respectful, generous, and understanding, yet there will still be people who mistake your silence for weakness and your compassion for permission. They push your limits, ignore your boundaries, and slowly convince you that keeping the peace is more important than protecting yourself. But that belief comes at a very high price. The truth is, toxic people do not stop because you explain yourself better. They do not change because you sacrifice more. In many cases, every time you tolerate disrespect without consequence, you silently teach them that your dignity is negotiable. And once that lesson is learned, the cycle repeats again and again. Real strength is not loud. It does not seek revenge, humiliation, or conflict. It is revealed in one simple decision, a decision so powerful that it changes the way people see you forever. The moment you make it, those who once took you for granted begin to realize that they no longer have access to the version of you that accepted less than respect. Today, we will explore that single shift in mindset. It is not a trick to control others. It is a practice that transforms you from the inside out. Because when your presence is rooted in self-respect instead of approval, toxic people lose the power they once believed they had over you. And from that moment forward, disrespect no longer finds a place to live in your life. One of the greatest mistakes people make when dealing with toxic individuals is believing that every act of disrespect deserves a response. It feels natural to defend yourself, explain your intentions, prove your worth, or convince the other person that they are being unfair. But the more energy you invest in someone who has already decided not to value you, the more valuable your attention becomes to them. What they are often seeking is not understanding. They are seeking control. Every emotional reaction you give them confirms that they still have influence over your inner world. Attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. You may think your money, your possessions, or your reputation are your greatest assets, but your attention is even more precious because it shapes your life. Whatever receives your attention receives your energy, and whatever receives your energy begins to grow. When you continuously feed toxic people with emotional reactions, arguments, explanations, or endless chances, you are watering weeds while expecting flowers to bloom. Many people unknowingly reward disrespect because they fear losing relationships. They believe that if they remain patient long enough, the other person will finally appreciate them. They hope that one more conversation, one more apology, or one more sacrifice will change everything. Unfortunately, toxic personalities often interpret patience as permission. Every time there are no consequences, they become more confident that they can continue their behavior without losing access to you. Imagine someone who repeatedly interrupts you, mocks your opinions, ignores your feelings, or constantly crosses your boundaries. If every incident is met with forgiveness, but no change in your behavior toward them, what lesson are they learning? They are not learning respect. They are learning that disrespect costs them nothing. Human behavior naturally follows rewards. When negative behavior brings no consequences, it often becomes stronger instead of weaker. This is why emotional discipline becomes more powerful than emotional intensity. Toxic individuals often expect dramatic reactions. They expect raised voices, lengthy arguments, emotional texts, desperate phone calls, and endless attempts to fix the relationship. These reactions feed the cycle they have created. They keep you emotionally invested while allowing them to remain emotionally comfortable. The cycle continues because your attention becomes the reward. Choosing not to reward disrespect does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not mean suppressing your emotions or accepting poor treatment. It means refusing to participate in games designed to drain your peace. There is a significant difference between reacting impulsively and responding intentionally. One is controlled by emotion. The other is guided by wisdom. People who possess quiet confidence understand that every conflict is not worth entering. They ask themselves a simple question before responding. Will this conversation create clarity, or will it simply create more chaos? If the answer is chaos, silence often becomes the strongest answer. Not because silence magically changes the other person, but because silence protects your own peace from unnecessary damage. Many toxic people survive on emotional access. They know exactly which words trigger you. They remember your insecurities. They study your reactions. Over time, they become skilled at pressing emotional buttons because they know which responses to expect. The moment those expected responses disappear, something changes. Their usual methods lose effectiveness because the reward is gone. This does not happen overnight. At first, they may increase their attempts to provoke you. They may criticize you more aggressively, spread rumors, become passive-aggressive, or accuse you of changing. They might even claim that you have become cold or selfish. This is often not because you have done something wrong. It is because they are uncomfortable losing the influence they once enjoyed over your emotions. Many people fail at this stage because they mistake resistance for failure. They assume that because the toxic behavior became worse, their new boundaries are not working. In reality, the opposite is often true. Whenever unhealthy patterns are interrupted, those who benefited from those patterns usually resist the change before accepting it. Their discomfort is evidence that the old system is no longer serving them. Learning to withdraw attention requires enormous self-control. Human beings naturally want to defend themselves when misunderstood. We want justice. We want fairness. We want people to recognize our good intentions. Yet not everyone deserves unlimited explanations. Some people are not listening to understand you. They are listening only to prepare another attack. Every explanation becomes new material they can twist against you later. This is why inner security becomes essential. When you truly know your values, you become less dependent on external validation. You no longer feel compelled to convince everyone that you are a good person. You understand that your character is not determined by someone else's opinion. The less you chase approval, the less power toxic people have over your emotional state. Respect also begins with observing your own habits. Sometimes we unintentionally teach others that our time is always available, our forgiveness has no limits, and our boundaries are flexible. We answer every late-night message, excuse every insult, tolerate every broken promise, and overlook every disappointment. Then we wonder why nothing changes. The uncomfortable truth is that people often continue doing what consistently works for them. Healthy relationships involve mutual effort. Respect flows in both directions. Appreciation is returned, boundaries are honored, mistakes are acknowledged. Toxic relationships operate differently. One person gives while the other takes. One apologizes while the other repeats the behavior. One sacrifices while the other expects even more. As long as this imbalance continues, disrespect remains profitable for the toxic individual. Walking away emotionally from these patterns is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-respect. It means recognizing that your emotional energy has limits. Every hour spent replaying hurtful conversations is an hour stolen from your growth. Every argument with someone committed to misunderstanding you is time that could have strengthened your mind, your purpose, or your peace. There is also tremendous strength in becoming less predictable. Toxic people often rely on knowing exactly how you will react. When your reactions become calm, measured, and intentional, they lose their advantage. They cannot manipulate responses that no longer exist. Instead of chasing every conflict, you choose carefully where your energy belongs. Instead of proving your worth to people who refuse to see it, you invest that energy into becoming someone whose confidence no longer depends on anyone's approval. This shift changes more than your relationships. It changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must constantly earn respect. Instead, you begin acting like someone whose respect starts from within. That internal change becomes visible without a single announcement. Your posture changes, your conversations change, your standards change. Even the people around you begin treating you differently because your actions communicate something your words never could. The most powerful message you can send to someone who repeatedly disrespects you is not an angry speech. It is demonstrating that access to your attention is no longer guaranteed. Attention is earned through mutual respect, honesty, and consideration. When those qualities disappear, your attention should become increasingly rare. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but because your peace deserves protection and your energy belongs in places where it is valued rather than exploited. One of the clearest signs of self-respect is the ability to establish boundaries without feeling guilty. Yet for many people, this is one of the hardest skills to develop. They fear disappointing others. They fear being misunderstood. They fear rejection, conflict, or being labeled as selfish. Because of these fears, they continue saying yes when they want to say no. They continue allowing behaviors that quietly drain their peace, believing that keeping everyone comfortable is the same as being a good person. Over time, this habit becomes an invitation for toxic individuals to take more than they deserve. A boundary is not a wall built to keep everyone out. It is a gate that determines who enters your life and under what conditions. Healthy people respect that gate because they understand that every relationship requires mutual respect. Toxic people, however, often see boundaries as obstacles standing between them and control. That is why they question them, challenge them, and sometimes even ridicule them. They benefit from your lack of limits, so naturally they resist whenever those limits begin to appear. Many people assume that setting a boundary requires a long explanation. They prepare detailed speeches, hoping the other person will finally understand why they feel hurt or uncomfortable. They believe that if they can find the perfect words, the other person will respond with empathy and change their behavior. But toxic individuals often do not lack understanding. They simply lack respect for your limits. The issue is rarely communication. The issue is entitlement. This is why boundaries become far more powerful when they are simple. Instead of offering endless reasons, you calmly state what you will and will not accept. You do not argue about your standards. You do not negotiate your dignity. You simply make your position clear through both your words and your actions. The fewer unnecessary explanations you give, the less opportunity there is for manipulation, guilt, or debate. Notice how confident people rarely feel compelled to justify every decision they make. They understand that adulthood comes with responsibility for one's own choices. If they cannot attend an event, they simply decline respectfully. If someone repeatedly violates their trust, they create distance. If a conversation becomes disrespectful, they end it. They do not spend hours defending decisions that protect their well-being because they know that self-respect does not require unanimous approval. Toxic people often use guilt as a weapon. They may remind you of everything they have done for you. They may accuse you of changing, becoming arrogant, or forgetting where you came from. They may say that you are too sensitive or that you are overreacting. These statements are designed to make you question your own judgment. Once you begin doubting yourself, they regain the control they fear losing. Learning to recognize guilt-based manipulation is essential. Genuine relationships allow room for disagreement without emotional punishment. Healthy individuals may feel disappointed by your boundaries, but they still respect your right to have them. Toxic individuals, on the other hand, often treat your boundaries as personal attacks because they have grown comfortable benefiting from your lack of them. One reason boundaries feel uncomfortable is that many people confuse kindness with endless availability. They believe being compassionate means always making sacrifices, always listening, always forgiving, and always accommodating. While generosity is a beautiful quality, generosity without wisdom eventually becomes self-neglect. When every relationship demands that you ignore your own needs, compassion turns into exhaustion. There is a profound difference between helping someone and allowing someone to repeatedly harm you. Helping comes from strength and choice. Enabling comes from fear and obligation. Every time you continue accepting disrespect simply because you fear conflict, you teach yourself that your comfort matters less than someone else's expectations. Eventually, this belief begins shaping every relationship you enter. Boundaries also reveal the true nature of people around you. Some individuals will adjust their behavior once they understand your limits. They may apologize sincerely. They may become more thoughtful. They may value your honesty because it creates healthier communication. Others will become angry, defensive, or distant. While this reaction may feel painful, it often provides valuable clarity. It shows who valued the relationship itself and who merely valued unrestricted access to you. Many people remain trapped in unhealthy relationships because they mistake familiarity for loyalty. They think that because someone has been in their life for years, that person deserves unlimited tolerance. Time alone does not create healthy relationships. Respect does, trust does, consistency does. Someone who has known you for decades but repeatedly disrespects your boundaries contributes less to your well-being than someone who has known you briefly yet consistently treats you with kindness. Another common mistake is setting verbal boundaries without enforcing them through action. Words alone rarely change behavior. If someone repeatedly ignores your limits while you continue rewarding the behavior with unlimited access, your words lose credibility. Boundaries become meaningful only when your actions support them. If you say disrespect is unacceptable, your behavior must reflect that belief. Otherwise, the message becomes confusing both to others and to yourself. Enforcement does not require anger. It does not require revenge or punishment. It simply requires consistency. If someone continually interrupts your peace, you reduce their access to your time. If conversations repeatedly become disrespectful, you end them calmly. If promises are consistently broken, you stop relying on them. Your actions quietly communicate what your words already explained. Many people underestimate the emotional strength required to remain calm while enforcing boundaries. It is tempting to argue. It is tempting to defend yourself against accusations. It is tempting to prove that you are still a caring person. But emotional maturity often means accepting that some people will misunderstand you, regardless of how clearly you explain yourself. Their opinion cannot become the standard by which you measure your worth. There is also freedom in realizing that not every relationship is meant to continue forever. Some connections serve a purpose during one chapter of your life and naturally fade as you grow. Growth often changes your standards, your priorities, and your tolerance for unhealthy behavior. What you accepted 5 years ago may no longer align with the person you are becoming. This is not betrayal, it is development. Boundaries protect more than your emotional health. They protect your time, your focus, your energy, and your future. Every unnecessary argument steals attention from your goals. Every manipulative conversation drains motivation that could have been invested in learning, creating, serving, or growing. Every moment spent trying to satisfy impossible expectations delays the life you are capable of building. As your boundaries become stronger, something remarkable begins to happen. You no longer feel responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. You stop carrying guilt for choices that honor your well-being. You recognize that another person's disappointment is not always evidence that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes it simply means they expected unlimited access to someone who has finally learned the value of healthy limits. People who truly care about you will eventually recognize the wisdom behind your boundaries. They may not always agree with every decision, but they will respect your right to make it. They understand that love without respect cannot remain healthy. Trust without boundaries cannot remain safe. Kindness without discernment cannot remain sustainable. Instead of demanding constant explanations, they appreciate honesty, consistency, and mutual consideration because they understand that the strongest relationships are built not on unlimited sacrifice, but on balanced respect, clear expectations, and the quiet confidence to protect what matters most without apologizing for valuing your own peace. One of the greatest freedoms a person can experience is reaching a point where other people's behavior no longer controls their emotional state. This does not mean becoming cold, indifferent, or incapable of love. It means developing the strength to remain grounded even when others attempt to provoke, manipulate, or disrespect you. Emotional detachment is not the absence of feelings. It is the ability to choose which feelings deserve your attention and which ones deserve to pass without permission to disturb your inner peace. Toxic people often depend on emotional reactions. Their influence exists only as long as they can control your mood. If they can make you angry, they feel powerful. If they can make you anxious, they feel important. If they can make you question your worth, they believe they have won. Their satisfaction does not necessarily come from solving problems. It comes from knowing they still occupy space in your mind. This is why emotional mastery becomes one of the strongest forms of self-protection. The less your emotions are controlled by external circumstances, the less vulnerable you become to manipulation. Every insult loses some of its force. Every criticism becomes easier to evaluate objectively. Every attempt to provoke you begins to reveal more about the other person than it does about you. Many people misunderstand emotional detachment because they associate it with suppressing emotions. They believe strength means pretending nothing hurts, hiding every disappointment, or refusing to acknowledge pain. In reality, suppressed emotions do not disappear. They simply wait for another opportunity to surface. Genuine emotional detachment begins by honestly recognizing your feelings without allowing those feelings to become your master. Imagine standing beside a flowing river. Thoughts, emotions, and reactions move through your mind, much like the water moving past you. Most people immediately jump into the current. They allow every insult, every criticism, every opinion, and every disappointment to carry them away. Emotional detachment teaches you to remain on the shore. You notice the current, but you do not allow it to drag you wherever it wants. This skill requires patience because the human mind naturally seeks immediate responses. When someone insults you, your first instinct may be to defend yourself. When someone lies about you, you may want to expose them immediately. When someone ignores your value, you may feel compelled to prove your worth. These reactions are understandable, but they are not always beneficial. Between every event and every response exists a small space. Within that space lies your freedom. The strongest people protect that space carefully. They do not allow temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. Instead of reacting within seconds, they pause. They observe. They ask themselves whether responding will improve the situation or simply create another cycle of unnecessary conflict. This simple habit transforms emotional chaos into thoughtful action. Silence becomes especially powerful when it is chosen from confidence rather than fear. Many people remain silent because they feel powerless. They are afraid of confrontation or rejection. That kind of silence creates resentment. But there is another kind of silence that comes from complete self-control. It is the silence of someone who understands that not every accusation deserves an answer, and not every opinion deserves a defense. There are moments when saying nothing communicates more strength than delivering the perfect argument. Toxic people often expect resistance because resistance keeps the emotional game alive. They expect you to chase them, defend yourself, argue endlessly, or seek their approval. When those expected reactions disappear, the dynamic begins to change. Your silence quietly communicates that your emotional stability no longer depends on their behavior. This does not mean remaining silent in every situation. There are times when injustice must be confronted and truth must be spoken. Emotional detachment is not passivity, it is discernment. It is knowing the difference between a conversation that creates understanding and one that exists only to consume your energy. Wisdom lies not in speaking constantly, but in knowing when words serve a purpose and when silence serves it better. Many toxic individuals become uncomfortable around emotionally detached people because manipulation depends on predictable reactions. If every insult receives calmness instead of anger, if every provocation receives composure instead of panic, their usual strategies lose effectiveness. They cannot easily control someone who refuses to surrender emotional authority. Developing this kind of stability requires daily practice. It begins with observing yourself honestly. Notice which comments immediately trigger insecurity. Notice which situations make you desperate for approval. Notice which people consistently leave you emotionally exhausted. Awareness is the first step toward freedom because you cannot change patterns you refuse to acknowledge. Another essential practice is separating your identity from other people's opinions. Many individuals spend years allowing external judgments to define who they are. A compliment makes them feel valuable. A criticism makes them feel worthless. Their confidence rises and falls depending on how others perceive them. This creates a fragile foundation because public opinion changes constantly. Real confidence grows from knowing your principles rather than chasing popularity. When you understand your values, you no longer need every stranger to validate your existence. You can listen to constructive criticism without becoming defensive, because your identity is secure enough to learn. At the same time, you can ignore destructive criticism because you recognize that not every opinion deserves equal importance. Emotional detachment also changes the way you view rejection. Instead of seeing rejection as proof that you are inadequate, you begin seeing it as information. Not every relationship is compatible. Not every friendship is healthy. Not every opportunity belongs in your journey. Some closed doors protect you from environments where your peace would have been constantly threatened. Accepting this truth removes much of the fear that toxic people often exploit. Patience becomes another powerful companion. Toxic people frequently seek immediate emotional victories. They provoke today because they want today's reaction. Emotional mastery refuses to operate according to their timeline. Instead of allowing temporary discomfort to dictate behavior, you remain focused on long-term peace. You stop asking how to win every argument and begin asking how to protect your character. There is also strength in accepting that you cannot control how others think about you. Some people will misunderstand your intentions, regardless of how carefully you explain them. Others will create stories that fit their own beliefs. Trying to manage every opinion becomes an exhausting mission with no finish line. Emotional detachment frees you from this impossible responsibility. You focus instead on living with integrity, because integrity remains under your control even when public perception does not. As your emotional discipline deepens, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop feeling the need to prove yourself to people who have already chosen not to appreciate you. Your energy naturally shifts toward meaningful goals, healthy relationships, and personal growth. The attention once wasted on conflict becomes available for creativity, learning, service, and inner development. People notice this transformation even when you never announce it. Your voice becomes calmer. Your decisions become more deliberate. Your presence carries quiet confidence because it is no longer dependent on external approval. Those who once expected emotional chaos encounter unexpected composure instead. Those who once believed they could manipulate your reactions discover that your peace is no longer available for negotiation. The deepest form of victory over toxic people is not making them regret losing you, defeating them in arguments, or watching them suffer consequences. The greatest victory is becoming so emotionally stable that their actions no longer determine the quality of your day, the direction of your thoughts, or the value you place upon yourself. When your silence is supported by wisdom instead of resentment, when your calmness is rooted in self-respect instead of fear, and when your heart remains open without becoming easily controlled, you carry a strength that cannot be taken away by criticism, manipulation, or disrespect, because it no longer depends on the behavior of anyone outside yourself.